Hi, I'm Cassie Brooks from Brownsburg, Indiana. I'm a 20-year middle school health and physical education teacher, and in 2018, I was the Shape America Midwest District Health Teacher of the Year. I appreciate Iowa AFERD for inviting me to share with all of you how I go about planning out the semester in my health class and also each unit as I go about a skills-based approach to the learning that my students are doing in class. So just a little bit of an overview, and then I would be glad to answer any questions that you might have with me now and in the future. Always open to feedback, questions, concerns, whatever. I'm here for you. So thanks for listening, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So for starters, here's my contact information, first and last slide. So feel free to reach out through email, or I'm on Twitter at Brooks01CL. So give me a follow and connect with me. I have a lot of awesome people that I've connected with over time, and I certainly haven't develop the skills that I have as a teacher by myself. I've learned so much from so many different people, and you'll see many of them when you connect with me online. Quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in this session. First of all, why do we switch from content to skills? Some of you may have completely done that already. Some of you, that might be a new concept. Some of you might know what it is, but not be right there yet. Whatever that is, that's fine. I just want to give a little bit of a background on that. Also, how to go about planning when it comes to your semester or year long down to your lessons. Kind of how I've made that transition over time. It certainly hasn't been something that happened overnight. It's a little bit of trial and error. I'm going to share with you an example unit plan and give you pretty much everything that I use for that, from what I show the students, what worksheets they use to practice their skills with each other, and how they give evidence of their learning and provide all of that to you, their assessment, the rubric, everything. So I'll provide all of that to you. And want to also briefly talk about challenges that you might run into and how I've overcome some of those as I've gone through this transition to skills-based teaching. Then I'll also share some resources with you we can discuss in Q&A online. So quickly, why skills-based is to really get kids prepared for their life. And the truth of it is, I don't really know what every kid's life is going to entail. I can't predict it. I mean, how many of us predicted COVID-19? It just wasn't something on the radar. But there's so many new things that pop up in health and unique situations for different kids. Some may face autoimmune disorders. And not everybody needs to have a very in-depth understanding of all autoimmune disorders, but for some kids, that's going to be very important. I could try and teach all of that information to every single kid, but even better is if I give kids the tools that they need to be able to take care of and tackle any health challenges that they might come into contact with in their lifetime. So I want to give them skills for accessing information, making sure it's valid and reliable, and then going through the rest of the national health education skills, which I'll get back to. You've probably seen it in the year 2020. There's a lot of adults out there that lack critical health skills. Many people who are sadly very sick or even losing their lives because of lacking in basic self-care, and also some who are doing all of the right things but unfortunately are victims of this pandemic. But so many adults who are lacking the critical health skills of being able to analyze the source of information that they're using to make their health decisions. And that's been a challenge during this time. So that is something that you've probably noticed, is not everybody's really good about taking care of themselves. But when it comes to knowledge, because we can give kids a lot of knowledge in health class, but that doesn't always change behavior. For some kids, that might be something they consider. They might think, boy, I know a lot of things, so I'll make the right choice. However, not everybody will. There's a lot of kids who've gone down the wrong path, a lot of adults that have gone down the wrong path, and many of us can relate. Just because we know what we should eat all of the time doesn't mean that we always make the correct choices. However, self-efficacy, the confidence in believing that you can handle the challenges that come to you, now that is a source of behavior change. So when it comes to making changes for better nutrition habits, if I have goal setting skills and I get to practice those goal setting skills, I can build up the confidence in using them, and I can actually, with all of my practice, I can set new goals and use information that's around me because I know how to access information, make sure it's valid and reliable now. And I can use that information to improve my health and change my behavior if I need to. Health information and challenges are always going to change. So I think back when I first started teaching, I didn't teach anything about vaping because it didn't exist. Vaping is a newer concept. And I think back, if I just gave students back then information about cigarettes and why cigarettes are dangerous, all of the carcinogens, all of the health outcomes, many of them probably made the choice not to smoke cigarettes. Whether or not that was related to me, I don't know. But unfortunately, I do know I have some students who have made that choice. What I want to do to prepare my students well is I want to make sure that they have the skills and the confidence in their skills because they've practiced it in class. And with those skills, they can make an effective decision. They can get the information that they need. They can write a goal. They can achieve a goal. They can take all of the steps to achieve that goal. They can advocate for health choices. They can communicate their thoughts and their feelings, and they can say no when they're not interested in that substance. So if I give kids the skills, that sets them up for whatever they might encounter in their lifetime. And when it comes down to it, our time with kids is short. So I've got to make it count. In my situation, I have 45 hours with my students in either 7th or 8th grade. They come to me every other day for one semester. So it equates to about 45 hours worth of instruction, and that's it in middle school. They get a little bit of a puberty demonstration or information when they're in elementary school, and then they have nothing until high school health, which is often taken second semester sophomore year. In between, I'm it, and it's 45 hours. I've got to make my time count. So I really take seriously what it is that I do. Now, this is the curriculum that I have developed for my kids over time. In a semester's time, which is technically about a quarter since I'm every other day, this is what I use for my outline. This has been a in the works project for several years because each time I teach one of these units, I've kind of gone back and gone, I didn't really like the way that fit. And if it doesn't fit, then don't keep doing it. Just like any other teaching strategy, if you find it's awkward, forced, it's ineffective, then you're not going to repeat that lesson next semester. You're going to make adjustments, you're going to make it better, and then the next time through, it'll be so much smoother. So I've had to make adjustments. I will give you a little bit of advice. My curriculum might not work for everybody, and we'll get into the how to plan, and that'll kind of help explain some of that. I'm going to give you some of the basics of setting up skills-based instruction, although I am not the resident expert on this. And some of my favorite people to follow are Holly Alperin and Sarah Bennis. They are two who have been instrumental in changing my instructional practice. as well as many others. But if you want more information, I would suggest that you try checking out their blog, their website, and getting more information from them. They also have written some books. I share those in my resources later. But this is a quick overview. So when it comes down to planning for your kids, first of all, you got to figure out what they need. And there's lots of different ways that you can figure that out. First of all, you can look at national things like the Healthy People 2020 national objectives for health, looking at where are Americans struggling in general. That's going to be pretty generic information, but at least it gives you a basis for where to start if you're really not sure or you don't have current data that's more local. We also have the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, commonly called the YRBS, and that can be broken down specifically by your state, by your county, and it'll give you specific risk factor behaviors like students wearing seatbelts. Are they getting into a vehicle when someone is perceived, the driver's perceived to be under the influence? Teen pregnancy. There's a lot of things related to risk behaviors in youth. And so you could take a look at that and see how kids in your area stack up and where is the most need in terms of the skills that they are going to need to acquire. You can also look at kids count data. There's a data book, a national one, and it's also broken down by state and I believe by county. I have linked Iowa in my presentation, so if you're watching back on this, go through my presentation and you can click that link for Iowa specific information. You might also look to your county health department. I know ours has some data that's collected from the local hospitals, from care providers, from mental health providers, and they've kind of compiled some of the biggest issues related to health in my community. And then you might have something school specific, survey data on bullying or anything from the nurse. Counselors sometimes will survey the kids related to their health concerns, even sometimes discipline counts. So an example of how you might use that is if there's a drastic increase in the number of students who are caught vaping at school. That might be an indication that students need a little bit more functional information on that, and they need the skills. So what is the issue with them choosing to vape? Is it not having enough information to make a healthy decision? Is it that they're getting their information from the wrong source? So is it an accessing information issue? Is it a matter of making a decision? Is it analyzing influences? Is it being able to communicate their refusal skill under peer pressure? What is it that they're lacking? And those things will help drive your curriculum. You can do a direct survey of your own students and find out what they want to know more about, what skills they feel like they are pretty strong in already, and what they could use a little bit more focus on. And also what you see and hear from kids, because obviously we talk to them, we make connections, we hear things in the hallway, sometimes things that we don't want to hear, but that all helps to drive what it is that you teach in your class. But caveat here, nobody else has this perfect curriculum for your students. You can look and see my example. You can look online and find tons and tons of great examples of skills and functional information and how that fits for everyone. But nobody's going to have the one that's perfect for your kids except you. But I realize that takes time and a lot of effort and practice to get into place. So for the meantime, if you're still getting started on skills-based health, feel free to take a look around at what I am doing, what is available. I'll give you some resources to find out what other people are doing, and that gives you a good framework for getting started. Step 2 is to develop your objectives. What is it that you're needing your students to do? And where I get that is from the CDC's National Health Education Standards. Once you figure out the skill the students need, then you're going to go to the specific performance indicators underneath each one of them. It's really easy, user-friendly site. An example that I've included for you is if we're looking at standard 6, which is goal setting, commonly known as goal setting. And there's some different specific things kids need to do. They need to assess themselves, because you got to realize that there's maybe some room for growth before you really care about making a plan for that growth. They have to develop a goal to improve their personal health practice, apply strategies and skills to attain that goal. So they need to know how to go about achieving a goal. And then they should be able to describe how those goals are going to change as time goes on with different abilities, priorities, responsibilities. How's my goal different than your goal, and why? Step 3, we take those performance indicators and then we add in some functional information, also known as content. So that's the typical stuff that we've always taught for years in traditional health education classes. So it's the things like nutrition and physical activity, or mental health, or tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs, or infectious diseases, non-infectious diseases. Whatever it is that you, from your data, from your surveys, from figuring out what kids need, whatever that is, will then go ahead and tie that content information into the skill performance indicators to make objectives that relate to a content area. So for example, if we're looking at this goal setting again, we're adding on, this is for, in my particular case, I put nutrition and physical activity into the same kind of unit. It's a body competence, nutrition, and physical activity unit. Everybody's got different bodies and different confidence levels and different needs. And so I kind of put all of those together and I let students do a little bit of exploration based on what it is that they need. We look at overall healthy habits for those areas, and then they get to pick their own for goal development. You can break down that content into whatever you want in terms of what do you think is the most important for kids to know out of these topic areas. Remember that little things that they could look up later, don't take your time with that and try and get them to memorize it and quiz them, because that stuff, a lot of times if we're going to find that information later on in life, we need that information, we're not going to recall it from what we learned in middle school or high school health. We're probably going to go, oh yeah, I know something about that, let me look it up. And you're going to look it up online, you'll find that information there. So really focus on what is essential for them to know right now so that they can practice some of these skills. You can also allow students to choose a topic that most interests them. So for example, we might all go ahead and assess our nutrition and physical activity practices. Then one student might decide that they're going to do some goal setting related to getting more variety of proteins in their vegan diet, because they realize after they've gone off and found more information on that topic that, hey, I'm kind of lacking in some areas and I really need to improve that. So that's going to be my goal, is to research and learn about and plan for a variety of proteins and start intaking a better variety. And another kid is going, oh, my muscles are always so tight and sore, and my coach says I'm not very flexible. So that kid might be working on a post-workout stretching routine. And yet another kid just getting started doing anything physically active. They're going to pick their one thing that they need to improve upon most, because really when it comes down to it, we all have different health practices and goals that we need to set for ourselves. I can't say this is what you should have as a New Year's resolution. All right, get started, because you are different than I am. And so we need to allow our students to be themselves. And then when we come to 684, describing how those things can vary, we might discuss as a class how those things vary, but then look at some information related to people in our community that maybe aren't making as healthy of choices as they did before they left school. Since school, they've been struggling to maintain healthy habits. So maybe kids can journal how to overcome that particular hurdle of changing routines and changing priorities in life, and be able to overcome that later on themselves. Step 4 of planning and skills based is authentic performance assessment, letting students demonstrate the skills that you're teaching, because you can talk about the skills and tell them all about it. Think about PE. If you've ever taught PE, many of you have, just showing kids how to do something doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be able to do it themselves. Showing them and even breaking it down for them might not be enough. Is it helpful? Yes, and some kids will pick it up pretty quickly, but others really need to do it. And you might think that it all makes sense, and surely my kids got enough out of that to know exactly what to do. But then they go to demonstrate it, and you're going, that is so not right. So they need some feedback, they need some guidance, maybe they need some reteaching. And through that feedback, they can improve, continue practicing until they get proficient. So really you got to ask yourself, how am I going to know that this kids can do this skill, both today and later on? What evidence do I need? And plan for something realistic. There's nothing worse than having them plan for something that relates to your life and not theirs, because this is about them. So try to incorporate as much student choice as possible. Maybe they can choose from several different scenarios. Maybe they are choosing different topic areas. Maybe they're showing you they're learning in a different way. Particular student who absolutely loves to rap wants to do a rap that demonstrates their communication skill. By all means, allow them to do that. So incorporate that student choice to keep them motivated. Next is you're going to go through the instructional activities. So many of us were taught to first plan some lessons and then assess. This is just backwards planning. You're planning your assessment first, your goals and outcomes and your assessment of it, and then you're going to go back and teach the skills. Now, this is an excerpt from Holly and Sarah's book, which I reference later on in my resources. But don't let it overwhelm you. This is just like teaching a physical skill in PE, or if you've ever coached something before. So at the bottom of the screen, you're gonna see my kind of breakdown cues. One is hook them, get them excited, get them interested, get them to show that they're interested, show them the importance of it, why you're going to use this, when you're going to need this, how are you going to be using this in the class. Maybe even give them a glimpse of what the assessment's going to be later so they can get excited about that performance assessment. Then you're going to break down the skill into clear steps or cues. Demonstrate the skill for them. So I'm going to do this now. Then we are going to practice together. Then you guys are going to practice, maybe even in small groups, maybe some individual, and then discuss and do it as a group. We'll kind of go through that and get some feedback together, and then you guys start practicing on your own. Of course, there's feedback along the way, maybe checklists, maybe there's feedback from the teacher, maybe there's feedback from peers. And that feedback is used to make sure that students are getting where they're supposed to in the skill development. As they gain competence, you're going to give them more complexity in their particular task. And so maybe you're adding in details that challenge them a little bit, ask them to apply it in a new situation. And throughout that practice, they're getting feedback. That's all it is. That's how you teach a skill, whether it's a physical skill or it's something related to making health choices. But here's the thing, students should be doing most of the work. Just like if you've taught PE, you know that if you stand up in front of the class for 45 minutes and they only practice for 5, for one, they're going to hate you. And two, they're going to not get the practice that they need to feel confident in it. So show them, break it down, give them opportunities to practice small scale and go to increasing complexity. Give them feedback along the way. Ask them, are you guys doing this? Hey, tell your partner if they're stepping with their opposite foot. In health class, it might be, give your partner feedback. Are they making appropriate eye contact while they're communicating with you? Are they nodding their head to give appropriate body language feedback that they're actively listening? So give them those specific things to check in with each other so they get feedback. And then you're going to go on to, oh, sorry, here's one more example of skill development. And this could be analyzing influences. So you start with a skill introduction at the bottom, presenting, modeling, practice, and then feedback reinforcement. Of course, the assessment's going to be at the end. So I'm going to give you my example unit in decision making. So if our standard is basically making decisions that improve their health outcomes, I've linked that up with a content area of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, because I find that that's a really tough area for kids to make those decisions. So based on some feedback from our high school staff, I kind of decided to go ahead and incorporate decision making with this area. So you see the skill indicators. So when it comes down to it's determining when might I really need to use a decision-making process, because some things are snap decisions. Am I going to need to get help on this, or can I do this myself? What are some healthy and unhealthy alternatives? What could be the outcome? There's some different ways of doing that. And you might look around and see some different ways that people do this, but how I do it is through 3 lessons, essentially. Now, those lessons are not just a one-day lesson. Sometimes they take a little bit longer. You'll see that in my notes as you go through the actual PowerPoint. It lists out what's going to happen day 1. If you don't finish those things in lesson 1, well, then that goes into a second day, and that's okay. Be flexible and work with your kids at their pace. But it's kind of broken down into 3 different lessons. So the first lesson, we go through the steps, getting them hooked into why is this important, and I always drive it back to having them think about what are some decisions that they make now that they didn't get to make 5 years ago. Maybe what to eat for lunch, maybe what clothes to wear that day, maybe which friend they're going to hang out with, some of those kinds of things. Then as they look forward, okay, how about 5 years from now? What different decisions are you going to make then? How about 10 years from now? And they start thinking in a way that they haven't before. So this is challenging. That's one of my difficulties in teaching skills-based, and I'll come back to that when I go through some of the roadblocks that I've run into and how I've overcome that. It's different thinking for those kids. But once you've got them hooked, go through some modeling, some practice, some discussion in the group. Lesson 2 gets them some functional information that they're lacking. Now, my kids by this point have already gotten some information through playing a game with our school resource officer that's given them a lot of information about alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, specifically illegal drugs. However, I find that's not really all that they need to know. They need information on safe drug use, because they're all going, you mean my asthma medication is a drug? I'm a drug user? Oh, okay. So we need to go through what is safe drug use, what is misuse, and what is abuse. Then once they've got that information, we'll use that and tie it into our decision-making steps, and then practice using that in real life scenarios. And then lesson 3, they start my summative assessment. So this is the decision-making model that I use. This came from RMC Health, and that's here in the presentation, also later on in my resources page. And I kind of just like the little graphics. It kind of breaks it down. There are different levels. So if you're working with younger kids, they have like a 3 through 5 model. They have a 6 through 8 model. They have a 9 through 12 model. So you can kind of look at it. There's some times where I find the skills a little challenging for some of my students. They have a class that's a little bit slower pace, a lot higher special ed numbers. And so I might go back to the 3 to 5 model. It still has the basic tenets. It's just a little bit less complicated. Just a quick jump through so you can see the project that I'm going to do to assess my students is, in the end, they're going to create a scenario that involves teens and a type of drug. So it could be illegal. It could be something over the counter. It could be inhalants. It could be all sorts of things that we've included in our functional information that we've gotten in class. Then they're going to use a planning sheet that I give them. I'll also provide that to you to write out the steps of the decision-making model that they would use if they were facing that same scenario. Then make sure they understand your comic strip that you are creating is going to show a teen thinking through each step of the model, not just showing the right decision. How do we get there? You guys need to show me that you can make that decision by following these different steps. Of course, I give them the information when it's going to be due. Today's for planning and work. That's on day 3, lesson 3. And I also let them do it digitally if they prefer. We don't have one-to-one, so mine are usually pencil paper. However, that may be changing in the future. If students do it digitally, I just ask in class, don't blow it off and say, oh, I'll do it tonight. Well, if you can't work on it right now, then you're going to do it out on paper, plan it out, and then you can put it into your comic strip app. Of course, in middle school, especially, I need to provide some scaffolding. Several kids have never been in a situation where there might be drug use or misuse or abuse opportunities. They might be kind of confused. And when I didn't provide the scaffolding of some potential options, students would do things like, some dude in a hoodie comes down the street in the back alley and says, hey kids, do these drugs. Well, that's not realistic. So I gave them some possible scenes and some substance options. Of course, that gives us an opportunity to go through, like, what's a wine cooler? What is a Jello shot? Because those are things that realistically they may end up coming into contact with later on in life. You can always let them choose things that are not on the list, but those are just some examples to get them started, because some kids, it's just a matter of getting started on it. I show them a potential layout, and I even have them take a picture of it so that if they're at home, they're not going, oh, I don't remember what it was that she said I could put on the different squares. We actually fold up a paper. I mean, it's literally that simple, that we fold it into 8 pieces. And then they fill in each of the boxes. They have to show their step 1, their step 2, where they come up with different options. They have to show some of the consequences that might happen. So I will show all of that to you. I'm actually providing you all of this information. This is part of the student planning sheet that they go through to take them through the steps of the model. Now, they've actually used a very similar planning sheet as they've gone through some other decision-making practices in class with their friends and on their own in small groups together as a class, in order to practice and prepare for being able to do this individually on their own. Of course, we want to make sure that they feel successful before we ask them to do it for an assessment. That's our job as educators. I want to make sure too that they have their rubric in advance so they know exactly what it is that they're going to be including in their comic strip. What am I looking for? They have to identify a decision. I even break down the specific parts of the standard that are in there. A character examines 3 options. They have to consider positive and negative outcomes. They have to identify 2 influences that might affect their decision, because we've already done influences, analyzing influences on health behaviors. Then they have to decide, and there's some steps that they go through in that decision making, and then take action regarding the healthiest decision, evaluate the decision. So most of the emphasis there is that they identify the decision or problem that they have to solve, and then they go through and examine different options and potential outcomes that might be there. I have the students take this rubric and encourage them, if they have time while they're working in class, to have a peer kind of assess their work. Do you see all of these? And just can put like a little check mark in each box if they see it. If there's concerns, they can make a comment like, I didn't see this one. Or advanced, like, wow, you gave 4 options. That's great. And so it kind of gives them a little bit of peer feedback Then they need to self-assess before they turn in. If you don't have students self-assess, you know how that goes. You spend all this time going through what needs to be in their project. They turn in things that have nothing to do with the project. So they should be going through and self-assess. I tell my students, I want you to tally up your score. What score are you going to earn on this? That you have all of these things in here. And when they do that, if they figure out, oh, well, it's at 25 points and I only got a 19. Okay, are you happy with that? No. Do you still have some time that you could work on that? Well, yeah, I could probably take it home tonight and, change that. Okay, well, look at what we're missing, fix it. Don't turn it into me when it's not done. So if you haven't demonstrated that skill to me, if you haven't shown me all the steps in that skill, I want you to keep working until you can show me all of those skills. So again, my curriculum overview kind of shows how I break it down by month in my class. So the first month is when I do accessing valid and reliable health information products and services. Now I say content areas wellness. Well, that's partly understanding that there's physical health and there's social health and there's mental and emotional health, understanding the different components of health, that it's not just about your physical body, but then also getting reliable, valid information on those things, being able to find a good source. And when you find a source, go, wait a second, that's from 1998. That's ancient. That's not even updated. Or figuring out that, hey, this is written by some chick who didn't have any training and then started a yoga studio because she attended a couple classes. I don't know that I want to trust her opinion on healthcare advice. So it allows students to go through, and I have a whole way that they do that, checklist that they go through, and basically they end up accessing that information, analyzing the validity of different sources, and then sharing with the class what they learn. But it's on any topic area that they want in health. And I give them a whole bunch of different options to consider. So some students are doing theirs on a genetic disorder that runs in their family. And other kids are trying to figure out, do cell phones cause brain cancer? So there's all sorts of things that they might be interested in, and it gives them some choice in it. But once we have that basis, everything that they ask me during class, because they get a little bit annoyed by the fact that I don't just give them information. I don't always answer all their questions. They'll ask me, well, like, are there a lot of chemicals in vapes that are in cigarettes too? I don't remember. Do you think you could look that up? And they're like, oh, yes. Like, did someone teach you at some point in time how to make sure you get valid sources? Yes, Mrs. Brooks, that was her first unit. Okay, great. So I have them go back and look it up. Then we get into influences, which leads really well into decisions. And my kids, there's so much information that is new to them related to alcohol and tobacco, other drugs, that as we're getting into it, I find that we have so much to do still that I'm not ready to move on from alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And so we go into decision making there. Then getting into goal setting, and that's going to be very personalized for each student depending on what their particular needs are. But it's related to nutrition, body confidence, physical fitness. Managing oneself to better health is also known as like self-management, and I use mental health in that. Of course, there's going to be some communication skills that are included in our work with mental health. There's going to be some functional information to share there. There's going to be all sorts of things that kind of tie in together. But basically it's coming up with, what's my plan for taking care of my mental health and knowing when I need to get help and how to reach out. Also that self-care, super important. And then finally, I get into interpersonal communication, which is my healthy relationships or sex ed unit. If you attended my other Iowa AFERD presentation, it was on teaching sex ed with confidence. And I share my curriculum on there too. And that is very content driven. And that's partly because it's school board approved and that's what they wanted me to do. So there's a lot of content. It's pretty heavy on that functional information. But then we get into the interpersonal communication. How do we develop those healthy relationships? How do we communicate our needs? What are our needs? What's my right? And what do I deserve in a relationship? And then how do I communicate my boundaries with others? So that all ties in really well. I like to hold that off until the end of my units because that allows us to establish some ground rules in the class, how we function together, kind of develop that respect before we get to that point. And then finally, becoming an advocate for one's health. And that's going to fall into disease prevention. And I actually include both infectious and non-infectious disease in those areas. If I don't get to something, it's probably going to be the advocacy. However, that disease prevention is tied into everything we do. So if you think back to nutrition, body confidence, and physical fitness, obviously that has to do with some of our non-infectious diseases. And so they're going to get some of that basic information. And as always, they can always access that information if they need it later on. But advocacy is something that they're going to develop a little bit throughout each of these skills. And honestly, just any of these skills really kind of overlap each other. And I find that we revisit many of the skills. Couple of challenges that I've run into with skills-based health ed. One is student resistance, because they're going, this is hard. Why don't you just give us stuff to learn and we'll take a quiz on it? Well, I teach them about skills-based health ed, what it is, how it works, how it's different, and let them know it's gonna be challenging. That's okay. This is their chance to learn, to practice, to get better at it, so that when it's real life and these decisions really matter, or the goals that they make for themselves really matter, when it really matters how they take care of themselves, they're ready. With other health teachers, again, teach them about the process, be patient with them, model it. It's kind of scary to teach a new way, but I kind of did a lot of the work until the people around me sort of got it and they started adopting it too. We sometimes struggle with how to get information to students quickly. I've got a lot of information on these slides, so you can always go back and kind of look up what it is that you're most concerned about. But I really pare it down to the most important functional information and then let them have different things to choose from. Do you want to read this magazine article? Do you want to look at this handout with tips and recommendations for how to get more fruits and vegetables in your diet? Which specific thing do you need that's going to give you what you need to actually be able to carry out that skill? And lack of training and time, well, yeah, I get that one. My school doesn't allow me to have time out of class unless I do it on my own time using my personal days or on my own and on my own dime. So go to my resource page, engage in Twitter chats. You'll find so much information on Twitter. A couple added tips. You don't have to hit every single skill every single year or every single semester that you have with kids. If there's multi-levels of health education in your program, then work with your colleagues to break down what do they most need in 5th grade? What do they most need in 7th grade? What do we really need to focus on when they get to the high school? There's going to be some review. There's going to be some repetition of the most essential skills or parts of skills or content area that might have to be repeated or different parts of that functional information. So just use different scenarios, have them apply it differently, have them apply it with a different set of functional information. So if we applied that skill with mental health previously, well, now let's have them apply that skill with nutrition. And another thing to know is it's okay to reorganize. It's okay if it's not working and you go, yeah, this was not a good fit. I started out a unit one time a couple years back and realized this was going nowhere fast. The kids were frustrated, I was frustrated. I said, hey guys, let's just finish through this particular lesson today, and then I'm going to revisit how we go about learning this, because it doesn't seem like this is really working out well. We redid it the next time using different scenarios, different content, and it worked wonderfully. So I kind of take notes and make adjustments as I can. So if the project rubric was confusing, okay, well, what would make more sense there? And the kids will give me information, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I like those words better, and I'll make that change. Or if I realize every single kid is getting stuck on step 4, then maybe I need to reword step 4. So just change your alignment if you need to. Don't be afraid to make changes. It's okay to make mistakes. If you have to do practice outside of the classroom environment, I know many of us are looking at hybrid and online models. Consider other ways that kids can connect with either classmates or family members or even you to get feedback. Can they assess themselves using a checklist or a rubric and then submit it to you with an explanation of why they deserve the score that they gave themselves? Could someone else, either virtually or in person, assess them with a checklist and they submit a score in a summary paragraph explaining why that was? So at first, when I was talking to my dad and practicing my active listening skills, he said that I forgot to do this. Then I fixed it. The second time through, he said I did a fantastic job. And now I feel like I really know how to be an active listener. So think about ways that you can creatively get that information to you without you having to assess every single thing one-on-one with every single kid. That's just not very practical. Keep in mind this is about the kids and their life outcomes. So let the focus be on them. You're going to do a lot of prep work at first, but they should be really doing the work in class. It takes some time to set these things up, making sure you have the scenarios, making sure you have different steps for them to work through. But then they should be doing a lot of the work so that you can just be there, kind of like you are in a PE setting. You're there to give feedback while they do the practice. They're doing the work, they're doing the improving. You're just there to kind of coach them through it. And give yourself grace. If you're doing skills-based health education, your students just being aware of the skills and the parts of the skills, or at least thinking about, oh yeah, I might use that sometime. They're already better off than if you had just stuck with giving them content to memorize. I've got some resources here for you. First of all, the National Health Education Standards. That's of course where I got the performance indicators as well. Some different locations where you might get data that will help you to determine what your students' needs are. Sarah Bennis and Holly Alperin's books, you'll see pictured here. Those are the two that I use. They also have one for elementary. And so you can use those to kind of get some ideas. Some of the things that I use came from that book, but I had to adapt them to my kids and what my kids needed. RMC Health, I find, breaks down the skills in a nice way for kids, and they have posters that you can print out, but there's lots of different models. So for decision making, some people use a different decision making model where there's a step for D, E, C, I. My 7th graders were like, wait, what? There's too many steps. Okay, fine. So we broke it down. We use the RMC model, but you can find different models out there and different worksheets, different documents, different skill practice scenarios. You'll find lots out there. Shape America, if you're a member, has a teacher toolbox that has a lot of teacher created materials that have been tried out in the classroom and we know are standards based. And there's some archived Shape webinars, if you're a member as well, that you can access. On Twitter, or other forms of social media, the hashtags SBHE, skills-based health, all of those. And I'm hoping you guys have some great suggestions too, and I'd be glad to pass those on to others. So that's what I've got for you today. Please reach out to me. I love to kind of guide people through this process because I'm so excited about how it has improved my teaching and how much better prepared I feel like my students are for their future life. I always say my why is I want to get kids to live their best life. Well, skills, giving them the confidence, giving them the opportunities to practice those skills that they're going to be using for their whole life. This is exactly what skills-based health ed is for. It's for helping them to live their best life. So if I can help you in that journey, I'd be glad to. Um, Feel free to email me or hit me up on Twitter, and I will see you out there. Thanks so much for paying attention.